Hey, it's Lou, and here's the thing. It's time to start worrying about water. According to the United Nations, about 2.5 billion people, that's 36% of the global population, already live in water-scarce regions. And by 2030, intense water scarcity may displace as many as 700 million people. The water shortfall, which is projected to increase, threatens everything from our food supply to our energy production. Experts worry it will spark violent conflicts as governments compete over an essential but dwindling resource. However, a water shortage is just one part of the story. In some places, too much water is the existential threat as floods and hurricanes threaten vulnerable populations. Many of the trends driving both sides of the crisis, including a population surge, urbanization, and climate change, are all growing. Meanwhile, experts agree that our water supply has long been and continues to be mismanaged and used inefficiently. So, with so much on the line, how can we make sure our planet doesn't go thirsty? And what will it cost? Follow the water. That's a NASA slogan, a sort of guiding principle as they explore other planets. Without water, scientists know, life here on Earth or in the great beyond is impossible. Yet, in places all over the globe, there is a water shortfall. In 2015, the city of Sao Paulo turned off its water supply at various times daily in order to build up its reserves. Many businesses were forced to shorten workdays as a result, a reminder that water scarcity can have a major economic impact. But Sao Paulo is just one example. A 2016 study found that as many as 4 billion people already live in regions that experience severe water stress at least 1 month a year. Some of the main drivers of this disturbing development are so obvious it's not worth discussing in depth. The world population grew by 4.4 billion people between 1950 and 2010, so demand for water skyrocketed. In addition, as the economies of countries like India and China developed in recent decades, they needed more and more water to sustain industrialization. Dr. Peter Gleick, President Emeritus of the Pacific Institute, told me if we don't figure out this conundrum, we can see an increase in the number of violent conflicts over water. Almost 90% of the world population lives in countries sharing trans-boundary waters. In a water-scarce world, there might be hostile competition for these resources. On the other hand, Scott Moore, director of the Penn Global China program and the author of Subnational Hydropolitics, told me that he thinks water scarcity will actually lead to increased cooperation among nations. He's more worried about water conflicts within countries, as different states or territories vie for the water they need. In 2018, for instance, 14 people were killed in northern Kenya after ongoing conflicts between two ethnic groups over land and water resources turned violent. And in India, where 2 people were killed and 400 were arrested in 2016 water riots, a senior water authority official once said, quote, "Hydropolitics is threatening the very fabric of federalism." All of this is to say, the stakes are very high, especially since the vast lion's share of water is used to grow food. Arjen Hoekstra, a professor in water management at the University of Twente in the Netherlands, told me the agricultural industry accounts for 92% of the world's water footprint. That's a well-regarded concept Hoekstra invented to measure the amount of water used to produce each of the goods and services we use. Given the agricultural industry's outsized reliance on water availability, Paolo D'Odorico, a professor in UC Berkeley's Department of Environmental Science, Policy, and Management, told me the water crisis is a problem of hunger, not of thirst. He told me to reduce that enormous water footprint, farmers ought to grow crops that make sense for their region. In a study he co-authored, D'Odorico found that redistributing where some crops are grown will reduce irrigation water use by 12% and feed an extra 825 million people. In addition, Hoekstra told me beef production is particularly water intensive. A single kilogram of beef, that's about 2.2 pounds, requires over 15,000 liters of water. Overall, according to data Hoekstra showed me, a normal diet that includes dairy, eggs, meat, and fish is almost twice as water intensive as a vegan diet. That's why Gleick thinks we ought to rethink the food we eat, perhaps a few less steaks and burgers. D'Odorico added that we ought to cut down on our food waste. As I pointed out in a previous episode, about 1/3 of all food grown is wasted or lost to things like spoilage. That's enough to feed nearly 2 billion people at a time when worldwide hunger is growing. Hoekstra told me it's too easy to point a finger at water-intensive agricultural products like wine in South Africa or beef in Brazil and say they are to blame for the crisis. He told me the policies that allow for such inefficiencies are to blame. Edward Barbier, a professor of economics at Colorado State University and the author of The Water Paradox, writes that the global water crisis is predominantly a crisis of inadequate and poor water management. He told me that the vast majority of water policies and institutions were created in an age when water seemed like an endlessly available resource. This mindset of abundance has led to waste and inefficiency, Barbier explained, and especially so in the agricultural industry. For instance, when farmers water their crops, they often use a crude technique called flood irrigation. During this process, a large percentage of water, perhaps as much as 50%, is wasted to evaporation or is uselessly absorbed into the soil. And keep in mind, some estimates assert that irrigation currently consumes 70% of the world's fresh water withdrawals. Gleick told me we could get more crop per drop if we use different types of irrigation systems. Alternative methods like drip irrigation work much more efficiently by employing sensors and making sure crops aren't overwatered. But they're expensive. And this gets at what experts tell me is a core flaw. We don't value water properly. It is way too cheap. Barbier told me the water bills citizens receive in the mail are artificially low, and that farmers don't get charged for how much water they use. Instead, they get charged for delivery and access. Therefore, there's no economic incentive to operate more efficiently. Consider, desalination is a promising technique, but it's costly. Without expensive research and development, it will likely remain too pricey and too energy intensive to serve as a large-scale solution. A blog post published by the World Resources Institute in 2017 summarizes it well. Quote, "Why would a company or government invest in expensive water-saving technologies when water is cheaper than the technology in question?" That's why experts like Barbier, Gleick, and Hoekstra all think we should have to pay more for water. This would encourage conservation, spur investments in new technology like desalination, and nudge our diets in a less water-intensive direction. The good citizen in me understands this argument, but the budget-conscious part of me always resists higher bills. Moore was sympathetic to this sentiment, adding that an increase to the price of water might make food more expensive and can even create a wave of unemployment among farmers, a group that isn't exactly rolling in cash. Moore told me this makes the politics of raising the price of water extremely difficult. However, the price of inaction is clearly unbearable. The status quo is an unsustainable trajectory. A high-level panel assembled by the United Nations and World Bank warned that if the world continues on its current path, projections suggest that we may face a 40% shortfall in water availability by 2030. And let's not forget the way climate change exacerbates the issue. Gleick told me that though climate change doesn't necessarily cause extreme weather events, it certainly makes them worse. Warmer temperatures lead to more evaporation and longer droughts. And as air warms, it retains more water. So hurricanes in the era of climate change produce more rainfall than they otherwise would. That can lead to flooding. No surprise then that the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration warned that the 2019 flood season could be unprecedented and dire. Gleick told me this is a reminder that those dealing with too much water are also victims of this crisis. So too are those whose water is polluted. The UN reports that more than 2 billion people are compelled to drink contaminated water, causing a child to die every minute of every day. Environmental destruction like deforestation and swamp clearance worsens all sides of this dynamic. Natural infrastructure like trees and wetland can help purify dirty water and prevent flooding. When they are eliminated, our vulnerability increases. Now, taking a step back for a minute, Gleick told me that when we developed our modern energy and water systems, we either did not know or did not care about the impacts to the environment. Now, we're seeing the consequences of that ignorance, and it's time to clean up the mess. Perhaps that means paying more at the grocery store, or at the gas station, or when our water bill comes. Perhaps that means ordering a little less meat. That may suck, for sure, but we've long enjoyed a free ride. In the 20th century, humanity ran up a bill. Now, we have to pay it. If we don't, we jeopardize world health, world wealth, and world security. Governments could provide subsidies for the neediest among us. New technologies might mitigate some of these issues, but we're all responsible. We all better change course before the planet runs dry. okay, I'm going to go live my life.